The Dinosaur Asteroid. 66 million years ago, Earth had a very bad day. A giant asteroid, about 10 kilometers wide, slammed into what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released more energy than billions of nuclear bombs. The blast instantly vaporized everything nearby. Shockwaves circled the planet. Tsunamis taller than skyscrapers swept across oceans, and wildfires ignited forests worldwide. But the worst part came from the sky itself. Dust and ash filled the atmosphere, blocking sunlight for months. Temperatures plunged, plants died, and with no food, animals starved. This event ended the reign of the dinosaurs. Nearly 75% of all species vanished, including the giant reptiles that had dominated Earth for millions of years. Only smaller creatures, including early mammals, managed to survive and adapt. It wasn't the complete end of life, but it was close. Earth became a planet of shadows, silence, and mass extinction. If that asteroid had been a little bigger, or if survival had tipped the other way, life as we know it, including us, might never have existed. The world didn't end that day, but it came terrifyingly close. The Toba Supervolcano. Around 74,000 years ago, a volcano in what is now Indonesia erupted with unimaginable force. It wasn't just a mountain blowing its top. It was one of the biggest eruptions in human history, the Toba Supervolcano. The explosion blasted ash and gas high into the atmosphere. Entire regions were buried under thick ash layers. But the real danger was global. Sunlight was blocked, temperatures dropped, and Earth slipped into what scientists call a volcanic winter. Some researchers believe this disaster nearly wiped out early humans. Populations may have shrunk to just a few thousand survivors. Imagine that. Our entire species hanging by a thread, scattered in tiny groups across Africa and Asia. One unlucky shift in climate, and humanity might never have made it. Not everyone agrees it was quite that extreme, but there's no doubt the eruption was a global catastrophe. Crops failed, ecosystems collapsed, and survival became brutally hard. The Toba event shows how Earth itself can turn against us. No asteroid, no alien invasion. Just a volcano with enough power to nearly erase humanity from the story. The Ice Ages. For most of Earth's history, the climate has swung between warm periods and frozen ones. During the Ice Ages, glaciers covered huge parts of the planet. Entire continents were locked under ice sheets miles thick. For humans, these frozen eras were a fight for survival. Early populations had to endure brutal cold, scarce food, and shifting environments. Many animals, like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats, eventually disappeared. Even humans nearly didn't make it. Some groups survived only by adapting quickly, hunting, gathering, and moving with the changing climate. At times, Earth may have come close to becoming a snowball Earth, where ice stretched from pole to pole. If that had lasted too long, sunlight would have bounced off the white surface, making it almost impossible for the planet to warm up again. Life could have stalled completely. Luckily, volcanoes and shifting oceans eventually brought enough heat and greenhouse gases to thaw the planet. But for tens of thousands of years, the Ice Ages pushed humans and animals to their limits. The ice didn't destroy Earth, but it nearly froze civilization before it had the chance to begin. The Black Death. In the mid-14th century, a deadly plague swept across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It became known as the Black Death, and it was one of the most devastating pandemics in history. The disease was likely carried by fleas living on rats, spreading rapidly along trade routes. Once it reached cities, it moved from person to person with terrifying speed. Victims developed fevers, swellings, and blackened skin before dying in just a few days. The toll was staggering. Historians estimate that up to half of Europe's population died within only a few years. Entire villages were abandoned, economies collapsed, and societies fell into chaos. For a time, it seemed like civilization itself might not recover. What saved humanity was sheer survival. Enough people were naturally resistant, and over time, the disease burned through populations until it slowed down. But the world was permanently changed. Religion, culture, and even the course of history were reshaped by the shock of so much death. The Black Death didn't end humanity, but it came terrifyingly close to turning the Middle Ages into the final chapter of our story. Smallpox in the Americas. When European explorers and colonists arrived in the Americas, they brought more than ships, weapons, and trade goods. They also carried diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, illnesses that native populations had never encountered before. Smallpox was the most devastating. It spread quickly through villages and cities, leaving behind fever, blisters, and death. Without immunity, entire communities were wiped out in weeks. Historians estimate that in some areas, up to 90% of the native population died. The loss was catastrophic. Civilizations that had thrived for centuries, the Aztec, the Inca, and countless others, collapsed almost overnight. Cities were abandoned, cultures were broken, and the balance of power in the Americas shifted forever. For the people living through it, it must have felt like the end of the world. Not from fire or flood, but from something invisible, an enemy they couldn't see or fight. Smallpox showed how fragile humanity can be when facing new diseases. It didn't just change lives, it changed the entire history of continents. The Tunguska Event. On June 30th, 1908, a massive explosion lit up the skies over Siberia. A fireball streaked through the atmosphere and detonated above the Tunguska River region. The blast flattened 80 million trees across more than 2,000 square kilometers, an area bigger than many major cities. The cause was likely a space rock, maybe 50 to 100 meters wide, exploding in the atmosphere before it could hit the ground. Even without impact, the energy released was thousands of times greater than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Luckily, Tunguska was remote. Hardly anyone lived there, so casualties were minimal. But if the same event had happened over London, New York, or any large city, it could have killed millions and destroyed everything for miles. For decades, scientists debated what caused it. Asteroid, comet, or something stranger. But the lesson is clear. Earth has close calls with space all the time. Tunguska was a warning shot. If the rock had been a little bigger, or if it had exploded over a populated area, history might have taken a very different turn. The world didn't end in 1908, but it easily could have. The Spanish flu. Just as World War I was ending, another disaster struck, this time invisible. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 spread across the globe with terrifying speed. Unlike most flu strains, this one was unusually deadly. It didn't just kill the very young or the very old. It struck down healthy young adults in huge numbers. Symptoms could appear suddenly, and within days, victims were gone. Hospitals overflowed, and entire communities were left helpless. In just 2 years, the Spanish flu infected about a third of the world's population. Estimates suggest it killed 50 million people, possibly more, far more than the war itself. Cities shut down, mass graves were dug, and life everywhere came to a halt. For a time, it felt like humanity was on the edge of collapse. The disease reached every continent, from crowded cities to remote villages. No one was safe, and medicine was powerless to stop it. Eventually, the pandemic burned out as survivors gained immunity. But the Spanish flu remains one of history's deadliest reminders that humanity's greatest threat can be something too small to see. The Cuban Missile Crisis. In October 1962, the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before. The Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US coast. The United States discovered them, and for 13 tense days, the two superpowers stood on the edge of disaster. Both sides had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet many times over. Leaders made speeches, armies prepared, and warships circled each other in the Caribbean. For ordinary people, it felt like the end could come at any moment, with no warning beyond a flash in the sky. Behind the scenes, secret negotiations were taking place. US President John F. Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev managed to reach a deal. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba, and in return, the US quietly agreed to remove missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended without war, but it was a razor-thin escape. Just one miscalculation, one accident, or one wrong decision could have triggered an all-out nuclear exchange. The Cuban Missile Crisis proved how close human politics alone can bring us to the end of the world, and how lucky we were that, in this case, cooler heads prevailed. The Soviet false alarm. On September 26, 1983, the Cold War nearly turned into World War III. In a secret Soviet bunker, alarms suddenly went off. Computers reported that US nuclear missiles were on their way. Protocol said the Soviets should launch back immediately. One man, Stanislav Petrov, was in charge that night. The system showed multiple missiles incoming, but something felt wrong to him. The numbers didn't add up. Why would the US fire just a handful of missiles instead of hundreds? Petrov made a choice. He ignored the alarms and reported it as a false warning. He was right. The attack wasn't real. It was caused by a glitch in the satellite system, mistaking sunlight reflections for missile launches. If Petrov had followed the rules, the Soviet Union would have launched its own missiles, the US would have responded, and the world would have plunged into nuclear war. One officer, one decision, prevented global disaster. Humanity survived that night not because of technology or strategy, but because one man trusted his instincts over a computer screen. The Soviet false alarm is a chilling reminder of how close we've come and how fragile survival can be. The Y2K bug. As the year 2000 approached, people feared the world's computers might bring civilization to a halt. The problem was simple but dangerous. Many older systems recorded years with just 2 digits, 99 for 1999. When the clocks rolled over to 00, computers might think it was 1900, not 2000. That tiny mistake could have caused huge problems. Banks might lose track of money. Power grids could shut down. Airplanes could be grounded mid-flight. Some experts warned of a complete breakdown of modern life at the stroke of midnight. Governments and companies around the world spent billions fixing their systems. Teams of programmers worked for years, patching code and testing everything from satellites to hospital machines. When the clock finally hit midnight on January 1st, 2000, nothing major happened. Lights stayed on, planes kept flying, and the apocalypse never came. For many people, it felt like a false alarm, but in reality, the world avoided disaster because of the massive effort to prepare. Without those fixes, the Y2K bug could have been much more than a joke. It could have been the day technology betrayed us. The near-Earth asteroid Apophis. In 2004, astronomers spotted a new asteroid, 2004 MN4, better known as Apophis. At first, the calculations looked terrifying. There was a small but real chance that Apophis could slam into Earth in the year 2029. The asteroid was about 370 meters across, big enough to level an entire region, wipe out cities, and cause devastation on a global scale. If it hit land, millions could die. If it splashed into the ocean, massive tsunamis could wash across coastlines. For months, scientists tracked it, refining their data. News headlines called it the Doomsday Asteroid, and people around the world braced for the possibility of disaster. Finally, updated observations showed that Apophis would miss Earth in 2029, but by a shockingly close distance. It will pass closer to us than some satellites. Even though we're safe for now, Apophis was a wake-up call. Space is filled with rocks just like it, and Earth is a moving target. One unlucky orbit, one miscalculation, and we could face a repeat of the Dinosaur Asteroid story. The world didn't end with Apophis, but it reminded us that the sky is always watching. The ozone hole crisis. In the 1980s, scientists made a shocking discovery. A giant hole was forming in Earth's ozone layer above Antarctica. The ozone layer is our planet's invisible shield, blocking dangerous ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Without it, life on the surface would be fried. Skin cancer rates would skyrocket, crops would die, and ecosystems could collapse. The culprit turned out to be everyday chemicals called CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, used in refrigerators, air conditioners, and even hairspray. For decades, we had been unknowingly tearing a hole in our own sky. At first, it sounded like the beginning of the end. If the ozone layer disappeared completely, Earth would be unrecognizable. But then came one of humanity's rare success stories. In 1987, nearly every country signed the Montreal Protocol, an agreement to phase out CFCs. Slowly, the ozone layer began to heal. The crisis didn't destroy the world, but it showed how fragile our planet really is, and how human actions can push us dangerously close to disaster. The ozone hole was a near miss, proof that sometimes, when we actually work together, we can step back from the edge. The Ebola Outbreak. In 2014, the world faced one of the deadliest viruses known, Ebola. It started in West Africa, spreading quickly through villages and cities. Ebola is brutal: fever, bleeding, organ failure, and it kills up to 90% of those infected in some outbreaks. This epidemic became the largest in history. Over 28,000 people were infected, and more than 11,000 died. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and communities were devastated. For a time, it looked like the virus could break out of Africa and spread worldwide. Air travel and global trade made the risk even scarier. A single infected passenger could have carried the disease to any major city. If Ebola had spread as easily as the flu, the world might have faced a pandemic far worse than COVID-19. Thankfully, intense efforts by doctors, aid workers, and governments slowed the spread. Quarantines, new treatments, and eventually vaccines helped bring the outbreak under control. Ebola didn't end the world, but it showed how a microscopic enemy can push humanity to the brink. The COVID-19 pandemic. In late 2019, a new virus appeared, COVID-19. At first, it seemed distant, a problem in one city. But within months, it had spread to every corner of the globe. Planes were grounded, cities locked down, hospitals overflowed, and the world changed almost overnight. COVID-19 wasn't as deadly as Ebola, but it was far more contagious. That combination made it devastating. Millions of people died, and billions more saw their lives disrupted. Schools closed, economies stumbled, and entire countries froze in fear. For many, it felt like the end of the world in slow motion. Empty streets, masked faces, and daily news of rising death tolls made it clear how fragile our systems really are. Eventually, vaccines, treatments, and global adaptation slowed the crisis, but the scars remain. COVID proved that in a connected world, one tiny virus can bring everything to a halt. The pandemic didn't wipe out humanity, but it reminded us just how close we are to disaster and how quickly normal life can vanish. AI and nuclear command warnings. During the Cold War, and even after, humanity faced another silent danger: computers making mistakes with nuclear weapons. Nuclear defense systems were designed to detect incoming missiles and respond instantly, but the technology wasn't perfect. In several cases, computer errors or radar glitches made it look like nuclear war had already started. In the United States, a training tape was once accidentally loaded into the system, showing a full-scale Soviet attack. For terrifying minutes, officials thought the end was here. In another case, a single faulty computer chip created a false warning of thousands of incoming missiles. Each time, quick thinking and human skepticism stopped disaster. But the risk was real. Had commanders trusted the machines without double-checking, nuclear retaliation could have been launched, and the world as we know it might have ended in fire. These close calls prove that the biggest danger isn't always the weapons themselves. It's the fragile technology and fallible humans controlling them. The end of the world could have started not with a bomb, but with a typo. The solar storm of 1859. In 1859, the sun unleashed the most powerful solar storm in recorded history. It's known as the Carrington Event, after the astronomer who witnessed the massive solar flare. The storm sent charged particles slamming into Earth's magnetic field, creating auroras so bright they were seen near the equator. In some places, people thought the morning sun was rising at midnight, but the real chaos came from technology. Telegraph lines, the internet of the 19th century, sparked, shocked operators, and in some cases burst into flames. That was with the simple tech of the 1800s. If the same storm happened today, the results would be catastrophic. Satellites would fry, power grids would collapse, GPS and communications could vanish for months or even years. Planes, internet, and banking systems would all grind to a halt. Billions of lives could be thrown into chaos, not by war or plague, but by the sun itself. The Carrington Event was a warning. Earth survived because back then, our technology was limited. But in a modern world, the same storm could feel like the end of civilization.